The voice of Detroit. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. Today is Sunday, September 17th, 2017, and we are live tonight. We have a lot to talk about tonight's a lot going on, and there are a lot of stories that took place this past week. There are a lot of things that took place this past week that are interconnected, interrelated, and they have to do with history. So we're going to deal with some of that tonight and tie these various stories together that took place in different parts of the country. Two or three of them took place here in the city of Detroit. All right. So this past week, we saw Kid Rock kick off the opening of Little Caesars Arena. And this got national attention. We know the National Action Network, Reverend Charles Williams II, and Sam Riddle, political director of the Detroit chapter of National Action Network. We know they led a protest up and down Woodward Avenue outside of Little Caesars Arena. And the Free Press reported about 200 people, but other people who were there saying there's more close to 400 or 500 people that were there. That got national attention. I know even before that protest leading up to it, NBCnews.com had an article about that. We posted some of those articles on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. I saw Sam Riddle today at the 11th Annual D-Town Harvest Festival at Rouge Park. I was there yesterday and today. Shout out to Malika Kinney and the people at the D-Town Harvest Festival. Then we see that on Monday, Jemele Hill of ESPN was responding to tweets about Kid Rock and what Kid Rock was saying, and Kid Rock's response to the protests against him even before the opening of Little Caesars Arena. And then she tweeted about Donald Trump, and I've read the tweets a number of times, still trying to figure out what she said that wasn't true. She talked about Donald Trump being a white supremacist and Donald Trump being a bigot, surrounding himself with bigots and things like this. I'm still trying to figure out what she said that was not true in the tweets. Trump is the most ignorant, offensive president of my lifetime. His rise is a direct result of white supremacy, period. Still going through, trying to figure out what she said was wrong. So then Sarah Huckabee Sanders, White House press secretary, the White House press secretary, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said that what Jemele Hill tweeted on her personal Twitter account is a fireable offense. Reverend Al Sharpton was asked by TMZ when he was at an airport, and Reverend Sharpton said if ESPN fires Jemele Hill, they'll launch economic boycotts. We'll boycott ESPN if Jemele Hill gets fired. Al Sharpton will boycott ESPN if Jemele Hill gets fired. So you have that taking place. Then you have here in the Metro Detroit area, Farmington Hills, Michigan, you have an African American boy, 6th grade, refuses to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. He has a teacher's consultant snatches him out of his chair. Then the next day, a teacher yells at him for not standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we see in the Lions game this past Sunday, September 10th, the Lions game, you have two African Americans, male and female, seasons ticket holders. Don't know why, but okay. Seasons ticket holders, right? They're sitting during the national anthem, rightfully so. And then you have this guy who, the Metro Detroit area business owner, he posts on social media about this and calls them ignorant. He takes a picture of them, allegedly takes a picture of them, posted up on, it popped up on his social media account. So either ISIS hacked his social media account or Anonymous hacked his social media account and uploaded this, right? Or he did it himself. Okay, and then he called them ignorant and called them the N-word for sitting during the national anthem. Then, if you follow reports about this, according to the woman who was in the picture, okay, Stacey Graham, he contrived an alternate story about two African-American servicemen behind them, pleading with them to stand, talking about what they went through, fighting in the war, or serving in the service, all types of nonsense like this, right? And then part of the protest behind Kid Rock was from 2001 to 2010, I think it was 2001 to 2010, maybe 2011. He would have the Confederate battle flag at his concerts. It's not the Confederate flag. I hear people keep calling it the Confederate flag. No, it's not the Confederate flag. That's the Confederate battle flag of Northern Virginia under General Robert E. Lee's army. Because there were 3 flags that flew over the Confederate States of America from 1861 to 1865. And that flag that people are walking around with, being sold, buying it like idiots, was never one of those flags. That's not the Confederate flag. Maybe if you study some history, you would know this. So the flag that was being sold in the parking lots at Donald Trump rallies, and some of Donald Trump supporters are flying this flag, the flag that was on the General Lee, on the Dukes of Hazzard, that's not the Confederate flag. Which shows how idiotic many of these people are. They're showing their own ignorance of history by the symbols they embrace. So on tonight's show, we're going to deal with the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. The racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. Now, some people may ask, well, why do you call it the white national anthem? Well, who wrote it? Who did Francis Scott Key write it for? Who voted for it to become the national anthem in Congress in 1931? African Americans didn't serve in Congress in 1931. We were ran out of Congress after the Reconstruction ends. So the African Americans weren't in Congress, and the president who did an executive order, Woodrow Wilson, in 1916, he was white. 1915, we know they did a screening. D.W. Griffith did a screening of The Birth of a Nation at the White House for President Woodrow Wilson. So tonight, the first hour, we'll deal with the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. And most African Americans know there's a black national anthem. Written in 1900, it will start out as a poem written by James Weldon Johnson in 1900. His brother, John, composed the music for it. It's called Lift Every Voice and Sing. That's called the black national anthem because we knew the other one wasn't for us. Then in the second hour, we'll deal with some of these other stories. We'll talk about the backlash of Jemele Hill. There's an update on that from today. We'll talk some about Kid Rock and some of Al Sharpton's comments, things like this. We'll deal with those other topics. We'll get to those in the second hour. But in the first hour, we're going to deal with the history behind this because the people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future. A people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future to meet their needs and solve their problems. So when I'm listening to things that people are saying on both sides, especially the other side, I'm listening to things people are saying, I can tell they don't understand the history that they claim they're trying to preserve. It's revisionist history. So I watched the Facebook Live broadcast from the protest march this past week. I think it was Tuesday. The National Action Network led. MLive.com. They broadcasted on Facebook for about an hour and a half. I shared it on my Facebook fan page where we have almost 1 million followers. So I shared it there. And I saw one white gentleman who came over to where the African American protesters were. The majority African American protesters, but there were some white protesters and Hispanics ones with them as well, right? So he came from across the street, okay, and he had a Kid Rock T-shirt on, and I was listening to the. He was talking about how, like referring to the Confederate monuments being taken down, and he said they're trying to erase history. No, we're not trying to erase history. We're trying to correct history. It's already been distorted. We're trying to correct history, not change history, because you can change it for the worse. It's not trying to change history. It's trying to correct it. because the inaccurate history has largely been taught. This is why people are running around with a flag that never flew over the Confederate States of America, calling it the Confederate flag, because they were taught incorrect history. All right, so on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events in history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Sign up for our email newsletter there, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay? All right, I'll be in, where will I be? End of this month, let's see, September 29th through October 1st. I will be in Louisville, Kentucky, the home of one of my heroes, Muhammad Ali. I'll be at the All Black National Convention. Dr. Boyce Watkins is putting on the All Black National Convention. Visit allblacknationalconvention.com for more information. Okay. Okay, so you listen to 910 AM, the Superstation, the Voice of Detroit. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. All right, so this past Wednesday was September 13th. And September 13th was the anniversary of the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner. A lot of people didn't know this. It's got past people. Also, September 12th was the anniversary of the death of Stephen Biko, one of our great South African freedom fighters. Stephen Biko, 40 years ago. It was 1977. Okay. So I want to dig into this history here, but first I want to go to Al, who's been holding since the beginning of the show. We're going to get Al on here in just a minute, line one. We'll come to you just a second, Al. All right. Also, I will be in, November 18th through the 20th. If you're in the Atlanta area, I'll be at the Black Power Awards in Atlanta. Okay, so go to blackpowerwars.com, blackpowerwars.com for that. Okay. All right. So let's go to line one. Let's go to Al. Okay. Hey, Al, welcome to the African History Network show. How you doing tonight?
How you doing, Mike? Hey, you know what I like about you, Mike, is that
yes.
You break down the issue that a lot of Caucasian people do not know. Now, I want to know, are you going to cover anything of Thomas E. Miller, one of the first black legislators during Reconstruction, to tell how these guys don't build public schools, how they help finance South Carolina? See, when these other guys calling into these shows like Walter and Kim, they have no understanding of the history of what black people have contributed and how they took them out after Reconstruction during the Great Combine, saying that black people could not go. But we helped set up schools, public school systems, and finance. I just want you to allude if you get a chance to get some information for people to know what's going on about that. Because it's seeming right now that all this stuff going on with Donald Trump,
right.
It seems like they're going back to like a third Reconstruction going on. And
right.
I'm just tired of hearing all the nonsense. So if you can get some more information, I would love to hear that. Like, you have a good evening.
All right, Al. Thanks for calling, man. Actually, if people, let's see, a couple things. Number one, I encourage you to read the book, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. Third edition is out. I just ordered it, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy. Then also, I posted on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, I posted a video from AtlantaBlackStar.com. And let's see, he's gotten 1,200 likes. I posted it yesterday. When did I post this? No, 11 hours ago. Good day. Got 1,200 likes so far. It's called 8 Times the U.S. Government Gave White People Handouts to Get Ahead. 8 times the U.S. government gave white people handouts to get ahead. It talks about the GI Bill. It talks about the Social Security Administration created in 1935. The GI Bill created in 1944. Homestead Act of 1860. Oh, it goes deep into some history here. So check that out as well. But let me jump into this, okay? All right, so September 13th. Okay, let's see. Let's clear the phone. Let me go ahead and get this call here, and then we'll get into this. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. All right, so September 13th, 1814. This is during the War of 1812. During the War of 1812, okay? Francis Scott Key pens a poem, which is later going to be set to music. And in 1931, this poem becomes America's national anthem. All right. Now, here's some history of the national anthem. Right. So the Star Spangled, and this is going to be called the Star Spangled Banner. Right. So the poem was originally titled "The Defense of Fort McHenry." The Defense of Fort McHenry, and it was written after Francis Scott Key witnessed the Maryland fort being bombarded by the British during the War of 1812. Okay, so once again, the U.S. is fighting against Great Britain. Okay, this is the War of 1812. All right, and if you hear the song, you know, in 1814 we took a little trip along with Colonel Jackson down the mighty Mississippi. We took a little bacon and we took a little beans and we fought the bloody British down the mighty New Orleans. That's called the Battle Hymn of New Orleans. Okay, that's during the War of 1812 as well. Now, Francis Scott Key was inspired by the sight of a lone U.S. flag still flying over Fort McHenry at daybreak, as reflected in the now famous words of the Star Spangled Banner. And that's the line that says, "And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there." Okay, the backstory. So Francis Scott Key was born on August 1st, 1779. Okay, and he was born in Maryland. Okay, and his family's he was born on his family's estate in Frederick County, which is now Carroll County, Maryland. He became a successful lawyer in Maryland and Washington, D.C., and he was later appointed U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. He was later appointed U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Now, his position as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia is very, very important because he was a slave owner and he was against the abolitionist movement, and he's going to use his position as a U.S. District Attorney to suppress the abolitionists, those who are fighting to free enslaved African people. Very, very interesting person, Francis Scott Key. Incidentally, this past Wednesday, September 13th, the 203rd year anniversary of Francis Scott Key writing the white national anthem. In Baltimore, there's a statue, there's a huge monument dedicated to Francis Scott Key. It was defaced early in the morning. Now, as everybody knows, I've said this before, I'm against defacing Confederate monuments, statues, Francis Scott Key, any of them. I'm totally against defacing them. I'm against spitting on them. I'm against spray painting them. I'm against all of that. Okay? I think now they should be removed. They should be removed properly by the local jurisdiction there, by the local authorities, and they should be put in museums. But I'm totally against them being vandalized, them being desecrated. Totally against that. Okay? Just so everybody knows. Okay, so on June 18th, 1812, America declared war on Great Britain after a series of trade disagreements. Now, in August of 1814, British troops invaded Washington, D.C., and they burned the White House. A lot of people don't know this. The British, not the American Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the British burned the White House, and they also burned the U.S. Capitol building, and they burned the Library of Congress. This was all during the War of 1812. Their next target was Baltimore, Maryland. After they did this in Washington, and if you've ever been to, you know, they call it the DMV area, you got, Baltimore, Maryland are there, right next to each other, right near each other. So after one of Francis Scott Key's friends, Dr. William Beanes, B-E-A-N-E-S, was taken prisoner by the British, Francis Scott Key went to Baltimore, located the ship where Dr. William Beanes was being held, and negotiated his release. Now, Francis Scott Key fought in the War of 1812 also. Okay, we're going to come to that in just a minute. However, Francis Scott Key and Dr. William Beanes were not allowed to leave until after the British bombardment of Fort McHenry. So Francis Scott Key watched the bombing campaign unfold from aboard a ship located about 8 miles away. After a day, okay, because this lasts for about 23 hours, okay, this attack, all right, this lasts for about 23 hours. So after a day, the British were unable to destroy the fort and gave up. Francis Scott Key was relieved to see the American flag still flying over Fort McHenry, and quickly penned a few lines in tribute to what he had witnessed. The poem was printed in newspapers and eventually set to music of a popular English drinking tune, called To Anacreon in Heaven, Anacreon, Anacreon, To Anacreon in Heaven. And this was composed by John Stafford Smith. So people began referring to the song as the Star Spangled Banner, okay, in reference to the U.S. flag that flew over Fort McHenry and was still flying in the morning, all right. So in 1916, President Woodrow Wilson announced that it should be played at all official events, and he signed an executive order to make it the national anthem, but it wasn't passed by Congress until March 3rd, 1931. In 1931, it passed Congress and officially became the national anthem. Okay, so it is less than 100 years that this has been the national anthem. Once again, as I said, this is the racist history of the white national anthem, and we're going to deal with the history of the Pledge of Allegiance also, because then when we deal with why African Americans are sitting as opposed to standing, then when you understand the background history, it makes sense. When you understand the background history, it makes sense. See, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past and the present and the future. So Francis Scott Key died of pleurisy, P-L-E-U-R-I-S-Y. It deals with the glands that surround the throat. He died of pleurisy on January 11th, 1843. And the flag that flew over Fort McHenry in 1814 is housed at the Smithsonian Institute's Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Okay? So because of Colin Kaepernick, his protests that started August of 2016, notice August 26, 2016, after San Francisco's game with the Green Bay Packers, okay? And we know Steve Weiss was one of the first ones, if not the first one. He had the article for NFL.com. Because of Colin Kaepernick's protests against white supremacy, against police misconduct against African Americans, people of color, and choosing to first sit down on the bench, then to take a knee during the national anthem to draw attention to what his protest was about. Because of this last year, then you had articles written about the history of the national anthem. So then a lot of people learned about the third stanza of the national anthem. Okay? Now, as you know, when I deal with this history, I don't get caught up in the third stanza. It's not the third stanza that's the problem. It's the entire song. The entire song is a white supremacist song. It's not the third stanza, because the song was written by a white supremacist slave owner who thought that African people were inferior. So it's not the third stanza, it's the entire song. So here's some more background information on Francis Scott Key, right? So when Francis Scott Key wrote the defense of Fort McHenry, which later became the national anthem, and he proclaimed our nation, quote, the land of the free, end quote, just like Thomas Jefferson, Francis Scott Key not only profited from owning slaves, he harbored racist conceptions of American citizenship and human potential. Okay, now he came from he was a slave. He not only owned slaves, but he came from a slave-owning family as well. Okay, they were wealthy also. Francis Scott Key said about Africans in America, or the enslaved African people, he said that they were, quote, a distinct and inferior race of people, which all experience proves to be the greatest evil that afflicts a community. A distinct and, quote, a distinct and inferior race of people, which all experience proves to be the greatest evil that afflicts a community, end quote. Now, a few weeks after the British troops in the War of 1812 stunned and demoralized America by attacking Washington, D.C. and setting the White House and the U.S. Capitol building and the Library of Congress on fire on August 24th, 1814, then you're going to have the British, they're going to move in on Baltimore, okay, as I said. Now, ironically, Francis Scott Key, who had a line in the national anthem that said, over the land of the free, but it's O''ER, over the land of the free, quote unquote. It is likely that the black slaves were trying to reach British ships in the Baltimore harbor, because you're going to have about 6,000 enslaved Africans who run away from the U.S. side and run to the British side, because the British say, if you come fight for us, we'll set you free, just like they did during the American Revolutionary War. Okay, just like they did during the American Revolutionary War. So they knew that they were far more likely to find freedom and liberty under the Union Jack, which was the British flag, than they were under the Star-Spangled Banner. Additionally, Francis Scott Key used his office as the district attorney for the city of Washington from 1833 to 1840 to defend slavery, attacking the abolitionist movement in several high-profile cases. In the mid-1830s, Francis Scott Key, in the mid-1830s, the abolitionist movement, I should say, was gaining momentum. And with it came increased violence, particularly from pro-slavery mobs attacking free African Americans and attacking white abolitionists. And other methods were used to silence the growing cries for abolition. In the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, they were inundated with petitions from abolitionists calling for the ending or restriction of slavery, pro-slavery, and what you're going to have pro-slavery congressmen are going to look for a way to suppress the voices of abolitionists. In 1836, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a series of quote-unquote gag rules, G-A-G, gag rules, to table all anti-slavery petitions and prevent them from being read or discussed, raising the ire of people like John Quincy Adams, okay, the 6th president, son of the 2nd president, John Adams. And John Quincy Adams, we know, was one of the defense attorneys in the Amistad case of 1839 with Joseph Q. They were defended by John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president. So this raises the ire of people like John Quincy Adams, who saw restricting debate, a debate when it came to the abolitionist movement. He saw this as an assault on a basic First Amendment right of citizens to protest and petition. In the same year, shortly after a race riot in Washington, D.C., when an angry white mob set upon a well-known free black restaurant owner, Francis Scott Key likewise sought to crack down on the free speech of abolitionists he believed were riling things up in the city. Francis Scott Key prosecuted a New York doctor living in Georgetown for possessing abolitionist pamphlets. This is the guy that wrote the white national anthem. It's not the third stanza, it's the entire song that's a white supremacist song. You listen to the African History Network show on Michael Imhotep, 910 AM Superstation, the voice of Detroit. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, guys, we'll be back in a few minutes. Part 2, don't go anywhere. We'll be back. Host, Brother Michael Imhotep. Today is Sunday, September 17th, 2017. We are live tonight. We're dealing with some of the stories that took place this past week, but we're dealing with the history. We're dealing with the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. The racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. So we know this past Wednesday, September 13th, was the 203rd anniversary of Francis Scott Key writing the Defense of Fort McHenry, which was a poem later set to music, and then it was called the Star-Spangled Banner. And it became the national anthem after it passed Congress in 1931. But a lot of people don't know the history of Francis Scott Key. He was a slave owner from Baltimore, thought that African people were inferior, became U.S. Attorney to Washington, D.C., used his position to help to fight against the abolitionist movement to free enslaved African people. So this is why when you read the words to the national anthem and you understand who wrote it and who he wrote it for, you understand it's the white national anthem. And then you understand why African Americans have the black national anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written by James Weldon Johnson in 1900. Because we knew the white one wasn't for us. So this is why you have more and more African Americans sitting for the national anthem. And Jackie Robinson was one of them, because when Jackie Robinson wrote his autobiography, I think it was 1970, I Never Had It Made, Jackie Robinson talked about how he could never stand for the national anthem again, how he could never pledge allegiance to the flag. And he served in World War II. This is the great Jackie Robinson that, you know, white people loved after they called him all type of N-words. First year, 1947, when he broke the unwritten color barrier in the major leagues. Because if you said that you were Cuban, you could play in the major leagues. You can be dark-skinned like Jackie Robinson, but if you said you were Cuban, had an accent, you speak some Spanish, you could play in the major leagues. But if you were a Negro, you couldn't play. It was an unwritten rule. It was a gentleman's agreement. That when you study this in when you study this in not the Negro leagues but the major leagues, when you study this, it was an unwritten rule. Okay, so I'm going to jump back into this information. Before we do that, I want to go to the phone lines quickly. Let's go to Manley, line 1. Manley, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us which city you're calling from. Okay, Manley, are you there? Okay, turn down your radio in the back, Manley, and talking to the phone. Listen to the phone. Okay, let's go to line 2. Cheryl, line 2. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, Cheryl.
Manley.
Is that Manley?
You have to.
Okay.
Cheryl. It's Cheryl.
Oh, Cheryl. Cheryl. Yes, Cheryl. You're on the air. How you
Turn
doing?
the radio down and listen to and talk through the phone.
Cheryl, can you hear me? You on the air?
Okay.
Okay. Let's try Brian, line 3. Brian, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Call from Detroit.
Detroit. Okay. Brian, go ahead with your question or comment.
I just had a comment the first time.
Cheryl, can you hear us?
How you doing today, brother?
I'm all right, man.
Cheryl.
Busy day, long day, brother.
I know how it is. As far as the national anthem goes, I don't really see the big deal because I remember when I was in high school, like me and my friend, we never stood up. You know, we had the white teachers saying, like, y'all should stand up. Why y'all not standing? We just looked at them like, okay, like, I'm not going to stand up.
Right.
I know what it's about.
Well, a lot of people don't know the history of the national anthem, don't know the history of Francis Scott Key. This is why they're out flying the Confederate battle flag and they think it's the Confederate flag.
Right.
You know, so go ahead.
Yeah, that's crazy. I mean, if you don't know, you know, the history about the national anthem and the people and everything, you just gotta, you know, put the phone down, go to the computer, and pick up some books, talk to some older folks. You know, luckily I was raised like that, so like I kind of know what the deal is. But, you know, the rest of our people need to kind of sad that a lot of us don't know some of these things, but
Right. Well, that's why we have to teach people. People's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future, because things happen in cycles. Okay, man, keep listening, okay?
all right, thank you.
All right, thanks. Let's go to line 1. Manley, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Calling from Detroit.
Detroit. All right, Manley, go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, my question is, if we Googled his name, would some of the things that you are saying about him, would that be on there?
Yep, I'm going to give you some sources to research.
Okay, good.
Okay? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks. Thanks. Keep listening. Okay, so right before the break, we talked about how in 1836, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a series of quote-unquote gag rules to table all anti-slavery petitions and prevent them from being read or discussed. This was 3 years before the Amistad. Now, this was about 20 some odd years after 1808, because in 1808 we know, because of a 20-year clause in the U.S. Constitution, the importation of enslaved Africans was outlawed. It was forbidden. And then we know that the slave breeding practice is going to explode in 1808. And also the importation of enslaved Africans is going to continue, but to a lesser extent, because abolitionists are out looking for slave ships. It's illegal, things like this. Also, the business of going into free territory, capturing free African Americans and taking them into slave territory is going to become a big business as well. And then when you study Solomon Northup in 12 Years a Slave, this is what happens to Solomon Northup. He was a free man who was in free territory, if I remember correctly, free territory. He gets captured, taken into slave territory, put into slavery for 12 years. That became the big business. Okay, so in 1836, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a series of gag rules to table all anti-slavery petitions and prevent them from being read or discussed. This raised the ire of people like John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president, who saw restricting debate and assault on a basic First Amendment right of citizens to protest and petition. In that same year, 1836, shortly after a race riot in Washington, D.C. broke out when an angry white mob attacked a well-known free African-American restaurant owner, Francis Scott Key likewise sought to crack down on the free speech of abolitionists fighting to end slavery, trying to live up to the Constitution, trying to live up to the pretty words in the white national anthem. Francis Scott Key sought to crack down on the free speech of abolitionists he believed were riling up things in the city of Washington, D.C. So Francis Scott Key prosecuted a New York doctor living in Georgetown for possessing abolitionist pamphlets. It was dangerous being an abolitionist in some parts of the U.S. It was dangerous being an abolitionist. Then if you look at 1852, when Francis Scott Key comes out with her book, her novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, 1852, which is based upon the autobiography of a real-life man named Josiah Henson. And the character of Uncle Tom in Uncle Tom's Cabin is based upon the life of a former slave named Josiah Henson, who escapes through the Underground Railroad into Canada and becomes a Methodist minister and operator on the Underground Railroad, becomes an educator. The book Uncle Tom's Cabin becomes an international bestseller. It sells, I think, is about 300,000 copies in its first year. And in the state of Maryland, where Josiah Henson was from, the book was outlawed. You had a case of an African-American man who was caught with a copy of the book. He got 10 years in prison for having a novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, because the book Uncle Tom's Cabin helped to expose America to the horrors of slavery and helped to galvanize the abolitionist movement. If you read Dirty Little Secrets About Black History, I think it's in volume 1, either volume 1 or volume 2. I think it's in volume 1 by Dr. Claude Anderson. He talks about Uncle Tom's Cabin, Josiah Henson, okay, and the popularity of the book and the penalty and how the book was banned in the state of Maryland. The state of Maryland is also where you had Roger B. Taney, who wrote the Dred Scott decision, and a few weeks ago they just took down his statue from the state's capital, rightfully so. Maryland is also where you have a statue of Francis Scott Key that was defaced, spray painted. They wrote slave owner on the base of the monument. This just happened this past Wednesday early in the morning, the 203rd anniversary of him writing the national anthem. Once again, I'm against defacing and desecrating statues and monuments, things like this. They should be taken down, but I'm against spray painting them and attacking them and tearing them down, things like this. They should be taken down correctly, like we just saw this past week they did with Robert E. Lee in Dallas, Texas. They took it down properly. They need all those things need to be put into a museum. But if the people flying the Confederate flags the Confederate battle flag outside of Kid Rock's concert at Little Caesars Arena, if they actually study some history, they would know that General Robert E. Lee was against Confederate monuments, and he was against using the Confederate battle flag or any Confederate flag after the Civil War ended. But unfortunately, these people don't want to study history. I just find that very interesting. And this is who the Illigists chose to be the opening act in Detroit, a city that's 79% African American according to the latest census. I just find that a slap in the face. I just find that a slap in the face. No justice, no pizza. You know, I just find that a slap in the face. But, you know, some people like to get slapped in the face. So, you know, okay. So, so back to Francis Scott Key, right? So, in the resulting case, U.S. versus Reuben Crandall, Crandall, Francis Scott Key made national headlines by asking whether the property rights of slaveholders outweighed the free speech rights of those arguing for slavery's abolishment. He asked whether the property rights of slaveholders outweighed the free speech rights of those arguing for the abolition of slavery. Francis Scott Key hoped to silence abolitionists who he charged wished to, quote, associate and amalgamate with the Negro, end quote, associate and amalgamate with the Negro. So he used his position as U.S. Attorney to Washington, D.C. to silence abolitionists who were trying to free enslaved African people. And you wonder why many African Americans don't stand for the white national anthem? And you wonder why there's a black national anthem? Though Reuben Crandall's offense was nothing more than possessing abolitionist literature, Francis Scott Key felt that abolitionists' free speech rights were so dangerous that he sought unsuccessfully to have Reuben Crandall hung. Wait a second, you mean the guy who wrote the national anthem? You mean the guy that wrote the national anthem tried to have a guy hung for having abolitionist literature? And you wonder why Colin Kaepernick is protesting against the national anthem? Any right-thinking African American should be protesting against the white national anthem. Any right-thinking white person should be protesting against the white national anthem. So people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past in the present and the future to meet their needs and solve their problems, because things happen in cycles. And what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself.
Can I have your name, please?
So for more information on this, you can check out the article from history.com, called September 13th, 1814. Key, K-E-Y, pins Star Spangled Banner. History.com, official website of the History Channel. September 13th, 1814. Francis Scott Key pins Star Spangled Banner. Then SmithsonianMag.com, official website of the Smithsonian Institute. SmithsonianMag.com, they have a great article. Where's the debate on Francis Scott Key's slaveholding legacy? Where's the, do they teach, when they have our children sing the Star Spangled Banner at school events, do they teach them that this was written by a white supremacist slave owner who tried to silence abolitionists to try to free their ancestors? Do they teach them this? Or are they programmed also? I'm just asking the question. Don't get mad at me. I ain't make this stuff up. Don't get mad at me. I ain't make this stuff up. Okay? So, Smithsonian Mag, SmithsonianMag.com, official website of the Smithsonian Institute. They have an excellent article. Where's the debate on Francis Scott Key's slaveholding legacy? Yeah, I want to get, yeah, that's a good question. Where's that debate? So then PRI.org has an article. Historians disagree on whether the Star Spangled Banner is racist, right? So if we look at this article, it's a show. If we look at this, they reference the article from TheRoot.com that Dr. Jason Johnson wrote, African-American Dr. Jason Johnson. You see him on MSNBC a lot. He wrote an article that came out July 4th, 2016, last year. July 4th, 2016. This came out the month before Colin Kaepernick's protests gained national attention. So then the article that Jason Johnson wrote the month before gained a lot of traction. It's called Star Spangled Bigotry, the hidden racist history of the national anthem. Star Spangled Bigotry, the hidden racist history of the national anthem. Okay? So, in the article it says, if we look at the article from PRI.org, historians disagree on whether the Star Spangled Banner is racist. In the article it says, essentially, they're referring to the article Jason Johnson wrote, right, for The Root. Essentially, Jason Johnson is saying, quote, Francis Scott Key was happy to see former slaves who had joined the British as part of their colonial marines get slaughtered and killed as they attempted to take Baltimore. Because the colonial marines was a regiment of the British Army, okay, of the British services, okay, armed services, that were made up of runaway slaves. And they run away from the U.S. and fight on behalf of the British. Okay? So, he said, quote, Francis Scott Key was happy to see former slaves who had joined the British as part of their colonial marines getting slaughtered and killed as they attempted to take Baltimore, end quote. Dr. Jason Johnson is an associate professor at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, and has a piece in the Root.com, the online magazine, the Root.com. Okay? And the article goes on to quote Dr. Jason Johnson saying, referring to the national anthem, the entire song sort of leads up to this point where he's essentially saying to these terrible, ungrateful black people, that is the consequence of standing up against the United States. So he's referring to the third stanza, which says, and where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country should leave us no more. Their blood was washed out, their foul footsteps pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. So this is what Dr. Jason Johnson was referring to. This is the third stanza a lot of people don't know about in the Star Spangled Banner, but when you study the history, as I said, it's not the third stanza, it's the entire song. That's the problem, not the third stanza. The entire song is a white supremacist song. That's why it's the white national anthem. So Dr. Jason Johnson goes on to say, so it's clearly racist, it's clearly pro-slavery, but it's pretty much in line with the kind of man that Francis Scott Key was, as we just talked about. So Francis Scott Key was a typical white male Marylander of his time, and he favored slavery. About 6,000 African Americans fled to the British side during the War of 1812 on the promise of freedom. Most of the men were recruited into the Royal Navy or into the Colonial Marines, a mostly black unit which fought with distinction. Quote, it was an amazing opportunity for African Americans to fight for their freedom, end quote, and fight against their former captors, the U.S. Many historians agree with Dr. Jason Johnson, but some disagree. They point out that Francis Scott Key never told anyone what he actually meant, and some historians interpret his mention of hirelings, Hirelings, hirelings and slaves, to reference all of the invading British forces. They say it echoes similar rhetoric used since the Revolutionary War, American Revolutionary War, 1775 to 1783, against Great Britain once again, to describe the forces of the King of England, especially those units purchased from German princes. American writers contrasted these miserable hirelings and slaves with the virtuous all-volunteer citizen armies of America. However, Dr. Jason Johnson counters that argument. He points out that Francis Scott Key himself faced the black colonial marines in battle. His unit was beaten and humiliated by them. This happened about 3 weeks prior to the defense of Fort McHenry. Quote, his troops were slaughtered so aggressively that he had to run home and hide in Washington, D.C., so this was personal for him, end quote. We'll continue this on the other side of the break. Give us a call, 313-209-9000, 313-209-9000. Listen to the African History Network show, 910 AM Superstation, the voice of Detroit. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right. Okay. Hey, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Let me see. All right, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. How's everybody doing? Calling number is 313-209-9000. 313-209-9000 is the call-in number, okay? We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, and visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, okay? So you can order all of my DVD lectures there. I have about 35 of my DVD lectures there. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We got the Black Friday documentaries that I'm in, the Hidden Colors documentaries, all of that. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can also follow our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network. African History Network show, second hour. Welcome back to the African History Network show, right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you like this type of information, you can check out my video clips there. You can read the articles that I write also. I have about 50 of my articles there that I've written. You can order my DVD lectures there also. I have about 35 of my DVD lectures. We have documentaries there. Some of those documentaries I'm in, like Elementary Genocide Part 3, Academic Holocaust, from director Raheem Shabazz. That just came out last month. Came out August 22nd. I'm featured in that documentary along with two of my teachers, Professor Kabahai Wapakamane, formerly known as Booker T. Coleman, and Professor James Small, who you see both of them in the Hidden Colors documentaries. And Scheherazade Ali in there, David Banner, Dr. Boyce Watkins. Then also, if you like this type of information, you can register for the online course that I teach. It's a 12-hour, 6-week online course. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Kemet is one of the original names for Egypt, ancient Egypt. Ma'afa is a key Swahili term that refers to our Holocaust, the great disaster, the transatlantic slave trade. Some people refer to the third leg of the triangular trade as the Middle Passage from Africa to the Americas, the voyage from Africa to the Americas. So I normally teach that on Friday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. You can visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register for that. It's only $40 for that course. As soon as you register, you can watch the first 4 or 5 sessions. There's about 20 hours of bonus content. We have a special session coming up Monday, September 18th, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. So tomorrow we have a special session. You can register for it. You'll be able to join us. You can tune in from around the world. It's online. And all the sessions are recorded also. Okay, so in the first hour, we were talking about the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. And then I'm going to get into the stories of Jemele Hill and talk about Kid Rock a little bit. I'll share a little bit of an article that I wrote about the protest that took place. Very quickly, before we go to the phone lines, I want to deal quickly with the history of the Pledge of Allegiance, because we saw a 6th grader in Farmington Hills refuse to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, snatched out of his chair by a teacher's consultant. This is a person training teachers. Really? You know, snatch him out of his chair for exercising his First Amendment right? Well, you should have had a lesson on the U.S. Constitution. Instead of snatching him out of his chair for refusing to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, maybe you should have had a teaching session on the U.S. Constitution. But when we look at the history of the Pledge of Allegiance, most people don't know the history of the Pledge of Allegiance. So the Pledge of Allegiance was written by a white Baptist minister named Francis Bellamy. Francis Bellamy and he was the son of a he was the son of a minister also, okay, and from upstate New York. And he was educated in public schools. He is going to go to University of Rochester as well. And he created a pledge that he wanted school children to recite in October of 1892. This is when the Pledge of Allegiance was originally written. October of 1892. And this was supposed to be part of a, it was going to be recited by school children during the opening ceremonies for the Columbian Exposition. The Columbian Exposition. And this was celebrating the 400th year anniversary of Christopher Columbus' arrival in the so-called New World. And Francis Bellamy successfully lobbied Congress for a resolution endorsing the school ceremony, and he helped convince President Benjamin Harrison, who was the president at the time, to issue a proclamation declaring a Columbus Day holiday. Wait a second, hold on. You mean to tell me the guy that wrote the Pledge of Allegiance that some of our students are still forced to say in school was written by the same guy who pushed to have Columbus Day made a national holiday? Now, Columbus Day is coming up. So this year, Columbus Day is going to be celebrated on October 9th. I think it's October 9th, okay? So Columbus lands in the Bahamas, what we call today the Bahamas. He called it San Salvador, which means Saint Savior. And he said he named it after his quote-unquote Savior, Jesus the Christ, but he then became a devil to the people, decimated their population. He landed there October 12, 1492. So this is on his first voyage. He set sail August 3rd, 1492 on the Nina de Pinta and the Santa Maria. Takes him about 7 years to convince King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella to finance his voyage. He's trying to prove that you can sail west to go east. He's trying to go east into Asia and India and find gold and silver and spices, things like this. Right? So October 12th, he lands in what Europeans call the New World. It wasn't new to us because we were already there. When you read The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence by Dr. David Imhotep, who's a friend of mine, he talks about in the book, first of all, the book has 713 footnotes. It's backed up by 7 peer-reviewed articles. But one of the things he talks about in the book is how African people were in North, Central, and South America, including the Caribbean, going back at least 56,000 years ago. South America 56,000 years ago. And the land we call the United States of America, going back at least 51,700 years ago. These are the Khoisan that have the oldest DNA on the planet. They're from Southern Africa, the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa, the Khoisan, also called the Khoi Khoi. And they go all around the world. But when you read his book, he talks about how at least 70% of the people Columbus encounters on his 4 voyages were African people. At least 70% of the people Columbus encounters on his 4 voyages were African people. So when you study Francis Bellamy, who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, this was to be recited at a 400-year celebration in October 1892, honoring Christopher Columbus. Number one, why would you want to honor Christopher Columbus, who brought genocide to indigenous African people and Native Americans? And then we know that in 1501 and 1502 in the Spanish territories that Columbus uncovers on his 4 voyages, they're going to, at that point, 1501, 1502, they're going to start taking Africans from Africa into those territories. And then we know in 1517, Right Reverend Bishop Bartholomew de las Casas has a meeting with King Charles V and says that the quote-unquote Native Americans have suffered enough and their populations are being decimated, and we need to enslave solely African people. So why would you want to participate in something like that? So when you study the origins of the Pledge of Allegiance, It was created to honor Christopher Columbus, who was a master of genocide. Read the article from Smithsonian.com. See, I can show you what white people say about this history. Smithsonian.com, official, SmithsonianMag.com, official website of the Smithsonian Institute. Read the article, The Man Who Wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. The Man Who Wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. This is from November 2003. The schoolroom staple didn't originally include under God, even though it was created by an ordained minister. The Man Who Wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. Read that article. Study this. You see, you got to study this history. And when they have current events at your child's school, and people are bringing in articles about Kim Kardashian and all this stuff, they're bringing some stuff like this. Deal with some real history. Let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Wilson, line 1. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, Wilson. Okay, from Detroit. From Detroit. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. A lot of good information to give. I just want to touch on a few things briefly. There's no doubt about the lie. I mean, this country was built upon so much hypocrisy and lies. I mean, the Star Spangled Banner, the Pledge of Allegiance, the father of the country, quote unquote father of the country, Washington, the lies from Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident. I mean, just on and on. Very briefly, I want to touch upon parliamentary procedure when you mentioned that the abolitionists were trying to get the issues laid on the table. Once they're tabled, you can never go back and revisit them. So they had no intention of going back and revisiting them, you know. And I'm not going to hold the line because I know you got quite a few people, but I want to end my comments with this. You know, lift every voice and sing to heaven and earth ring with the harmonies of liberty, that our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Thanks for the time.
Okay, man. Thanks for calling, Wilson. All right, let's go to Alan. Hey, Alan, welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm calling from Georgia.
All right, down in Georgia. Go ahead, brother.
Yes, sir. I was thinking that a new topic for you. We need to start a new league, a new NFL or whatever they call it, to be a UFL. That means that we only people that can buy teams is African American or Latino people. And we'll cut down the racism they got in the NFL now, and have states that doesn't have a team or market for it to participate in that.
Okay.
That's my thoughts, and I just want to get some feedback on that.
Okay, well, that's gonna be interesting, man. That's gonna be interesting there, trying to do that. But okay, All right, so 313-209-9000 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. 313-209-9000 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. Listen to the African History Network show. We're dealing with the racist history of the white national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. Once again, read the article, The Man Who Wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, from SmithsonianMag.com, okay? Because this was created by Francis Bellamy, an ordained minister, and he wanted school children to recite this during a 400th year anniversary honoring Christopher Columbus. It was a Columbian Exposition. So it was the opening ceremonies for the Columbian Exposition in October of 1892. And the other thing is, I don't understand why you would celebrate Christopher Columbus, is Columbus never came to the land we call the United States of America. This is the other problem. So and this is why in my lectures and my online course that I teach, I show you where Columbus went on his 4 voyages. He goes into Haiti and Puerto Rico and Cuba, Jamaica, Honduras, Panama. He goes in places like this. The closest he came to the land we call the United States of America was Cuba, which is 90 miles away. The closest he came to this land was Cuba, which is 90 miles away. So I still don't understand it. But this is what happens. This is what happens when you don't understand history. You participate in this type of nonsense. Now, the other thing that people don't know is that during the Pledge of Allegiance originally, you started out with your hand over your heart. And at a certain point, you're supposed to, you start out with your right hand over your heart. And at a certain point, your hand was supposed to extend straight out about a 45-degree angle as a salute. This was originally part of the national anthem. But during World War II, that's going to change. Why? Because that salute looked a lot like the Nazi salute. So they changed it, so you just keep your hand over your heart during the whole national anthem. That's a little history for you. Because people, I hear people talking, and they're dealing with emotions and feelings and things like this. But see, proper documentation is all conversation. Proper documentation is all conversation. This is why we need to deal with history. And the people's history teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future, to meet their needs and solve their problems. Because you see things happen in cycles. And a lot of this was exposed last year because of Colin Kaepernick's protest against the national anthem. He had all these articles written in articles that were brought back up that were written a few years ago dealing with the history of the Star Spangled Banner and the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance and all this. Okay? So, before we get to Jemele Hill, because this, so the White House is involved. The White House, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, one of the biggest liars I've ever seen. White House press secretary. Oh, well, I guess she's going to be a fraud and a liar because she's defending a fraud, a liar, and a con man. A guy who the Washington Post reported since he's been in office has told over 1,000 false or misleading statements, and they categorize them and they have them documented so you can research this yourself. You don't have to believe me. I tell people. You listen to my shows, you come to my lectures, I tell people you don't have to believe a word that I say. Proper documentation ends all conversation. I provide you with the sources. You can go research this yourself. You don't have to believe a word that I say. Okay? Before we go to the Jemele Hill story, and before we go to the article that I wrote entitled Hundreds of Protesters March Against Kid Rock and White Supremacy in Detroit, let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Rosa, line 1. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, Rosa.
Detroit, Michigan.
All right, Detroit. Go ahead with your question or comment.
My comment is my daughter was slapped. I'm 87 years old right now.
Okay.
My daughter was slapped when she was in the first grade primary. And I went up to the school and talked to the teacher. She had no more problems, but to this day, I'm so angry that I didn't slap her back. I am. No one should catch a hold of somebody else's child.
Okay.
And we're taking things too easy. Too many boys have been being killed.
Right.
And they say, oh, I thought he was reaching for his gun.
Right.
Oh, somebody chased somebody. And when these judges, they ought to put some of them in jail because they're not going. When you say, well, the policeman is off, he's with pay. Okay, he's getting a vacation for killing a black boy.
Well, that's not the judge. That is the police union that negotiated the police officer's contract with the city. That's not the judge. You have to really, you have to read the no. Listen, just a second here. You have to read the contract that the police officers have with the city that was negotiated for them by their union. If you read their contracts, because I've read them before, if you read their contracts, it stipulates, it lays out everything that's supposed to happen, it lays out the whole process. If there's some type of infraction, if there's a shooting, the whole process. That's stipulated in their contract. Go ahead and finish your question, and we have to go to the next call.
That's good. My nephew just retired from the detective, as a policeman, then as a detective, and now he's investigating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I have a husband that died waiting in the war. He went to the war. I got some pictures that would scare the hell out of you if you looked at them that my husband brought. I have the original pledge. Under God is not in there.
Yeah, correct.
They added it.
Yeah, they did.
When they added under God, why couldn't they take out and put in and justice for some? I don't stand to it either.
Right. Well, it wasn't written for us. It wasn't written for us.
I'm tired of taking down and letting our children get hurt and then don't do nothing about it.
Right.
That teacher should be fired.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's going to be a rally, Channel 4, click on Detroit, click on Detroit.com. Click on Detroit.com has an article from today, September 17th. Farmington District addresses rally, says everyone is taking all of this very seriously. So there's going to be a rally held outside of the school, East Middle School, on Monday, September 18th at 7:30 a.m. There's going to be a rally in response to an incident involving the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, you can check out that article. Click on Detroit.com. Click on Detroit.com. Okay, Rosa, I got to get this other call, okay? Okay. All right, let's go to Joyce. Let's rejoice with Joyce. Line 2. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, Joyce.
Detroit.
Detroit, okay.
Thank you for the play on my name. I appreciate it. I just went to this evening or this afternoon at the D-Town Farm.
D-Town Harvest Festival. I remember you. How you doing?
Yes. I'm thankful. How are you?
Oh, I'm all right. Just a long day. I've been up since what time I get up? 7 a.m. So it's been a long day.
Oh.
But I got to bed at 5 because I left D-Town and came straight to the studio. So I had to pull together all this content for the show last night and this morning before I went to the Harvest Festival.
That was wonderful that you could do that. And I'm just calling to say that I'm just so happy and thankful that you did the research that you did.
Oh, thank you.
And I had tried to research a couple of issues that were part of the story, the Francis Scott Key story.
Right.
And I just didn't get really as far as you did. And I just...
Oh, I got a ton of stuff. This is just a sample. I have a bunch of articles dealing with that. I'm just sharing 3 or 4 of them with you. I have a ton of stuff on this. Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, Joyce.
Like it.
All right, thanks for calling. Okay. And here's an article from last year, August 28th, dealing with Colin Kaepernick. Everybody should read. Because when people talk about Colin Kaepernick kneeling and he shouldn't kneel and all this stuff or sitting, blah, blah, blah. Defiant 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick faces mounting anger as he insists he will continue to sit. Okay, defiant 49er quarterback Colin Kaepernick faces mounting anger as he insists he will continue to sit for the national anthem. This is from dailymail.co.uk. Now, dailymail.co.uk, The Guardian, as well. They have some good articles. These are UK publications. This is from August 28, 2016. But in the article, Colin Kaepernick says that when there's significant change, and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, this country is representing people the way it's supposed to, I'll stand. Let me repeat this. This is what Colin Kaepernick said. So the people, the detractors of Colin Kaepernick, number one, don't tell you the true history of the white national anthem. They don't deal with the history of the white supremacist slave owner who thought that African people were inferior and used his position as U.S. Attorney to Washington, D.C. to suppress abolitionists, Francis Scott Key. They don't deal with any of that history because most of them don't know it. But they also don't say, wait a second, Colin Kaepernick said that when the flag represents what it's supposed to represent, this country is representing people the way it's supposed to. I'll stand for the flag. So instead of them saying, how can we help this country live up to its promises to non-Europeans, African Americans, people of color, they want to attack the person who's drawing attention to the hypocrisy of the country. I just find that very interesting. It's disturbing. I just find that very interesting. They just totally just gloss over that. Act like he never said it. Okay. But you don't understand. I got about 100 articles on Colin Kaepernick. That's from last year alone. Because I did a lecture on Colin Kaepernick in September last year. So I got a ton of stuff on this whole and how everything spread. I have a bunch of articles this year on Kaepernick. So, okay. All right, so coming up on a break here in a minute. Let me jump into the story here, Jemele Hill, all right? So the Daily Mail and the Washington Post had 2 good articles on Jemele Hill. And I got a bunch of articles on Jemele Hill as well, all right? So Monday, Washington Post has an article. White House, ESPN should fire Jemele Hill over Trump white supremacist tweet. White House, ESPN should fire Jemele Hill over Trump white supremacist tweet. This is from this past Monday, September 14th. I think that was Monday, September 14th. No, this was Thursday. September 14th was Thursday, 2017. Washington Post. In the article, it says Jemele Hill's tweet about Donald Trump came just before 8 p.m. on Monday, September 11th, okay, as a reply to 3 others who had joined the conversation sparked by an earlier tweet about musician Kid Rock, who has spent much of the summer teasing about a Republican run for the U.S. Senate. Okay? So, I'm not surprised by Kid Rock's comments, because Kid Rock is a Donald Trump supporter. And we know that white supremacists usually flock together. So I'm not surprised by his comments. I'm glad he's saying, I'm glad he's exposing himself. I hope he does run for the U.S. Senate. Okay, so Jemele Hill originally commented on an article tweeted by thehill.com. Hill is an excellent political publication. I read them every day. I monitor about 35 different news sources on a daily basis. Washington Post and The Hill are 2 of them. Okay, she commented on an article tweeted by thehill.com about Kid Rock's rejection of being labeled a racist because he favors the Confederate battle flag. It's not the Confederate flag, people, it's the Confederate battle flag. Jemele Hill's tweet about Kid Rock spurred hundreds of responses, which eventually resulted in a discussion about the White House. Now, the article tweeted by thehill.com is called Kid Rock Slams Media, Extreme Left, and Al Sharpton. Kid Rock Slams Media, Extreme Left, and Al Sharpton. Okay? All right, so we're going to continue this on the other side of the break. And, if you don't want to be considered a racist or white supremacist, maybe you should stop doing racist and white supremacist things. Maybe you should stop hanging around racists and white supremacists and having their symbols and things like this. If you don't want to, if you don't want to be considered a stripper, maybe you shouldn't dress like a stripper. I'm just saying. 313-209-9000 is the calling number. 313-209-9000 is the calling number. You listen to the African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep, 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. We'll be back in a few minutes. All right, guys. We'll be back in a few minutes. Hey, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. If you like this type of information, all of my DVD lectures are there. You can order my DVD lectures. You can register for the online course that I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. I don't think you're going to find this type of information other places. I don't think you're going to find this type of information other places. But see, I deal with facts and evidence. I don't deal with opinions. All right? Proper documentation ends all conversation. All right. So let me post this, and we'll be back in a few minutes here. All right. So we'll do this. We'll post this link here. So that's by my website. You can order all my DVD presentations there. You can read my articles there also. And then you can register for the online course that I teach at our website. But I'm going to post a link here for the online course as well, because we have a special session coming up tomorrow, Monday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation, the voice of Detroit. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have a lot of information there. You can read all of my articles that I wrote there, like the one I wrote this past Wednesday, September 13th. Hundreds of protesters march against Kid Rock and white supremacy in Detroit. Hundreds of protesters march against Kid Rock and white supremacy in Detroit. You can read all my articles. We have audio podcasts of our radio shows, almost 800 audio podcasts. Connect you to my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, on YouTube, where we have, about 700 video clips on YouTube. Connect you to our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, where we have almost 1 million followers on Facebook. And you can also order Elementary Genocide Part 3, Academic Holocaust, which is the latest documentary that I'm in from director Raheem Shabazz. This with the school to prison pipeline, taking control of our children's education. In that documentary, Professor Kaba Kamene, formerly known as Booker T. Coleman, who you see in the Hidden Colors documentaries, Professor James Small, Dr. Boyce Watkins, hip-hop artist and activist David Banner, Scheherazade Ali, just a few of the people in that documentary. Elementary Genocide Part 3, Academic Holocaust, available right now at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. For each copy you purchase, you get one of my DVD presentations free also. Okay, so there were a number of articles written about Jemele Hill. This is one of the big stories this past week. Jemele Hill, co-host of a sports show on ESPN, and very popular show. She's from Detroit also, sister from Detroit. But on Monday, Jemele Hill tweeted about Donald Trump. Jemele Hill's tweets about Donald Trump came just before 8 p.m. on Monday night, as a reply to three other tweets, to three others, I should say, who had joined a conversation sparked by an earlier tweet about musician Kid Rock, who had spent much of the summer teasing about a Republican run for the U.S. Senate. Okay, so Jemele Hill originally commented on an article tweeted by TheHill.com about Kid Rock's rejection of being labeled a racist because he favors the Confederate battle flag. The name of the article from TheHill.com is called Kid Rock Slams Media, Extreme Left and Al Sharpton. Kid Rock Slams Media, Extreme Left and Al Sharpton. And Jemele Hill's tweet about Kid Rock spurred hundreds of responses, which eventually resulted in a discussion of the White House and the current administration in the White House. So on Wednesday evening, after a day in which she was the subject of conversations in the sports world and far beyond, Jemele Hill returned to social media to, as she put it, quote-unquote, address the elephant in the room. She posted a statement in which she said, quote, "My comments on Twitter express my personal beliefs. My regret is that my comments and the public way I made them painted ESPN in an unfair light. Quote, my respect for the company and colleagues remains unconditional," end quote. So what she tweeted on Monday was this: Donald Trump is a white supremacist who has largely surrounded himself with other white supremacists. Check that one off, that's true. Stephen K. Bannon, who was running Breitbart before he went to the Trump campaign back in August of 2016. He went back to Breitbart. He said Breitbart was the home of the alt-right. This is what Stephen K. Bannon said. Sebastian Gorka, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, your current U.S. Attorney General, who cheered the gutting of the Voting Rights Act in 2013, U.S. Supreme case in Shelby County versus Holder. Stephen Miller, who's a senior advisor. Stephen Miller worked for Jeff Sessions, but he was mentored by Richard Spencer at Duke. When Stephen Miller went to Duke University, Richard Spencer is the guy who coined the term alt-right. He's the president and founder of the National Policy Institute. He's one of the leading alt-right, white supremacist, new white supremacist, white supremacy in the tuxedo organizations. This is the guy Roland Martin tore down for about 32 minutes when he had him on News 1 Hour last time. These are some of the people in Trump's neighborhood. She also went on to say, Jemele Hill, he is unqualified and unfit to be president. He is not a leader. And if he were not white, he would never have been elected. That's true also. You know, a writer wrote, it was an article, I'm not sure who wrote it, so I can't give him credit. But they said Donald Trump is everything that white people thought President Obama would be. Donald Trump is everything white people, not all white people, but some white people. Donald Trump is everything some white people thought President Obama would be. He's immoral, pathological liar, has multiple children by different babies' mamas. That's Trump. That's not Obama. That's Trump. Trump has different children by multiple babies' mamas. doesn't understand the U.S. Constitution, doesn't understand how Congress works. That's Trump. Continues to go back on his promises. Okay? That's Donald Trump. That's not President Barack Obama. He's a misogynist, sexual predator. You know, that's Donald Trump, by his own admission. Donald Trump is what many white people thought that President Obama would be. That's what Donald Trump is. Jemele Hill went on to say, Donald Trump is a bigot. Glad you could live with voting for him. I couldn't, because I cared about more than just myself. Still trying to figure out what she said that was wrong. So she posted this on her own Twitter page. She didn't say this on ESPN. She posted this on her own Twitter page. Check out the article from dailymail.co.uk. dailymail.co.uk. ESPN hosts under fire for calling Trump a white supremacist just weeks after comparing cops to slave patrols during Colin Kaepernick rant. Because this is what Colin Kaepernick said. Because when you look at the origins of the modern day police department, they come from the slave patrols that patrolled the back roads for runaway slaves and the slave catchers and dispensed punishment to slaves, and then they're going to become the modern day police departments, which were created to protect white people and to police African Americans. Now, I'm not saying all police do this. We do have a lot of good police officers. I'm saying when you deal with the origins of this, even when you look at the agenda, the 125-page agenda that the Congressional Black Caucus presented to Donald Trump on March 22nd, 2017, I don't think he read it. Even when you look at that, it's called We Have a Lot to Lose. We Have a Lot to Lose. Solutions to Advance Black Families in the 21st Century. Here's my copy of it. I took it to the printer, got it printed up. I've been studying this. We have a lot to lose. Go to cbc.house.gov. cbc.house.gov. When you turn to page 8, see, the first thing they do is lay out history of African Americans in this country and how we got to this predicament. Then they deal with the problems. Then they lay out, they have 50 pieces of legislation to address these problems. Because these problems are largely, many of the issues that we're dealing with today are largely the negative side effects of bad public policy. And on page 8, under African American history, they say slave patrols and night watches, precursors to modern day police departments, were established to control slaves. Slave patrols and night watches, precursors to modern day police departments, were established to control slaves. I just find it very interesting that Donald Trump doesn't even want to deal with implicit bias in policing, and neither does Vice President Mike Pence. And Pence said that during the campaign. I saw him say it on News1.com had an article about that. News1.com. So now we see, we're coming to the phone lines in just a minute here. So now we see that the White House, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, said that Jemele Hill's comments, okay, and I still can't find anything wrong with what she said, it's all factually accurate, is a fireable offense. Well, TheRoot.com reported tonight, well, actually, the article came out from the Wrap.com a few days ago, but the Root.com had an article from yesterday, September 16th. Sarah Huckabee Sanders hit with ethics complaint after calling for Jemele Hill to be fired. Sarah Huckabee Sanders hit with ethics complaint after calling for Jemele Hill to be fired. The Root.com has that article. Check that out at the Root. But when you look at the article from TMZ TMZ.com, Al Sharpton will boycott ESPN if Jemele Hill gets fired. In this brief interview that he did with TMZ, they call him at the airport. It says the Reverend Al Sharpton tells TMZ Sports he's furious with the White House and Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders for saying Jemele Hill's tweets are a quote-unquote fireable offense. Okay? And he went on, he said that, quote, let's not forget, ESPN is regulated by the FCC. That's the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC. The FCC commissioners are appointed by the White House, so it's a whole different level of intimidation on media outlets when you have the press secretary calling for a reporter's job. It's a whole different level of intimidation on media outlets when you have the press secretary calling for the reporters' jobs, and the FCC regulates ESPN. And the FCC commissioners are appointed by the White House. Reverend Al Sharpton says he has a message for Jemele Hill, quote, stand strong. If they take you out, many of us in the civil rights community will stand up for you and take ESPN off our service, end quote. Okay? But he also said that they would boycott ESPN. And I think a lot of people across the country are waiting to see, because if they fire Jemele Hill, it's going to be on. I got almost 1 million followers on Facebook. It is going to be on. Let's go to line one, Robert. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from, Robert. From Detroit. All right, brother. Go ahead.
Listen, now, you're talking about the Kid Rock thing, right?
Well, I was talking about Kid Rock. I was talking about Jemele Hill. We're talking about the history of the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance. Go ahead.
Yeah, Kid Rock. Well, I was on his first record, the one he sold 10 million.
Okay.
And he owed me like $1 million. But he won't pay me because I was on that record. And the devil without a cause. And I play at Eastern Market every Saturday, hustling on the street. Because, like I say, he told me he was going to do this.
Okay.
He told me that he was going to go out there with the Confederate flag, and he was going to get all the white folks to come for him. And he told me this 21 years ago. He was on my record, too.
Okay. I hope you have an attorney, man. I hope you have an attorney and you take the proper legal action regarding that as well.
No, but see, I got finally to, but by the time I learned all about it, because I didn't know the history of the music business,
Okay.
it was too late. You know, time limit.
Right.
You know,
Right.
stuff like that. But I'm telling you, he told me that.
Okay.
So that's what I'm telling you. This is a plot. He's just doing that because he knew, just like Trump, he knew by saying certain things, he can get the white folks. And the white folks support him. And that's all it is.
Right. Okay, man. Thanks for calling, okay? Thanks for calling, Robert.
All right.
All right. Okay, so you have the article from theroot.com. Sarah Huckabee Sanders hit with ethics complaint after calling for Jemele Hill to be fired. That's from Saturday, September 16th. Then you have an article from today, ESPN. From theroot.com also. ESPN public editor says Jemele Hill violated policy. ESPN public editor says Jemele Hill violated policy. ESPN's public editor said Friday that Jemele Hill violated the company's social media policy in her tweets Monday, calling President Trump a white supremacist, as Trump elevated the controversy by calling for Hill to be fired and for ESPN to apologize. Black journalists, meanwhile, seem largely to be standing beside Jemele Hill, especially after a disputed report by thinkprogress.org that ESPN tried to take Jemele Hill off the air this past Wednesday, September 13th, but that the potential African-American fill-ins would not go along with this. The report named none of its sources, and no other news organization substantiated it, but African-American employees elsewhere said they had seen management try similar divide and conquer tactics. Okay, check out that article. So you can read the rest of it. Theroot.com. This is from today. ESPN public editor says Jemele Hill violated policy. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. Okay. Let's go to Jack, and then we'll deal with this date in African American history. And this past September 12th, this past week, September 12th, Tuesday, was the anniversary of the death of Stephen Biko, one of our great South African freedom fighters. Stephen Biko. Jack, quickly, go ahead with your question or comment. Thanks for calling, Jack. Where you calling from?
Detroit. Thank you for taking my call.
Okay, yep, go ahead.
I just want to thank you and commend you for having the courage to speak up for justice for the black people. I appreciate you and for having the courage to speak up, because a lot of people won't speak up. You know, they're afraid.
Right.
And I just want to say that I'm ashamed of the police. I don't think, I think all of them is bad, because when you kill an innocent person that don't have no weapons like they did in Louisiana when that boy was laying on his back and they shot him in the chest, I know they didn't go to jail. That's what started me to hate America. And I just want to thank you for telling the truth and have a nice night.
Okay, Jack. Thanks for calling, man. Thanks for calling. All right. Check out the article. Metro Detroit dad says son assaulted for sitting during Pledge of Allegiance. We talked about that a little bit. You can check out that article. WXYZ.com. WXYZ.com. Metro Detroit dad says son assaulted for sitting during Pledge of Allegiance. I know this past week Cliff Russell had Stone Chaney on his show, and his who's the young boy, 11 years old, and his father Brian Chaney. Very, very good interview. It's on 910 AM Superstation's Facebook page, so you can check that out. It's a Facebook Live broadcast. You can check that out. Okay. All right. This date in African American history, September 17th. In the case of Joseph Senku, this deals with the Amistad from 1839. In the case of Joseph Senku and over 50 other enslaved Africans attempting to free themselves from the slave ship Amistad, a circuit court of appeals upheld their not guilty verdict of murder and mutiny on this date in 1840. This date in 1861, the American Missionary Association School established in Fort Monroe, Virginia, Virginia, opened on this date in 1861. This school, founded for the education of freedmen, had a black teacher named Mary Peake. Okay. This date in 1879, Andrew Rube Forster, R-U-B-E, Andrew Rube Forster, organizer of the Negro Baseball League. The first black baseball league was born in Galveston, Texas. This date in 1879. This date in 1947, Jackie Robinson, who we just talked about a few minutes ago, the first African-American player in the major leagues in modern times, was named National League Rookie of the Year on this date in 1947. Let's go quickly to Chuck. Chuck, we got a minute left. Chuck, go ahead with your question or comment.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you, Dr. Hotep. Hey, look, with all this being said and done, what would you suggest to pledge for this country?
To pledge for this country?
What pledge would you suggest for this country? With all this being said and done.
The country may want to write a new pledge that incorporates the different people of the country and deal with telling the true history of the country, with correcting the educational, and also deal with correcting the history that's taught in the schools, correcting the historical curriculum in the schools as well, and live up to, as Colin Kaepernick said, he said, when there's significant change and I feel like that flag represents what it's supposed to represent, this country is representing people the way it's supposed to, I'll stand, have a pledge that deals with holding America accountable to its promise and living up to it. Okay? All right. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks for calling. All right. Hey, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have a lot more information there. You can read my latest article, Hundreds of Protesters March Against Kid Rock and White Supremacy in Detroit. There at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.